Thank you for joining us this evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Rick Tex, the parasite of the show. You're listening to Text Messages The Resurrection, and we broadcast out of Elk River, Minnesota. You know, we brought this up a few times before, but most of our inspiration came from somebody who ran a public access channel out of central Minnesota in the early 2000s, and it was consistently the top-rated show, even if it was in the 2 a.m. time slot. It got ratings that were probably equivalent to what a 5 or 6 p.m. primetime TV show would have gotten. And if it had a national TV syndicate network, it would have probably outperformed virtually every show that would have been around at that time, and probably even today too, even with lesser of a population back then. I mean, that's not just extrapolating the percentage of people watching TV that would be watching that channel, and then bringing it to today's standards and saying, based on the percentages, it would be, you know, greater than today. It's just sheer quantity. So, I mean, if there's 5 million people watching TV back then, 4 million would have been watching that public access channel. And if there's 8 million people watching TV now, I mean, if the public access channel show was around today, yeah, there'd probably be like 7.5 million that would watch it. But back then, the highest rated show now is probably would have been less than 4 million. If, you know, we're just throwing out random numbers here, but to put it into perspective, it was probably one of the greatest shows around. And I was thinking about it today, and I mean, we might have to get back on television, radio, signal broadcast. You know, maybe get with Elk River or Rogers or maybe even Minneapolis and get some type of local broadcast, and then maybe we can anchor the 3 a.m. time slot on there. Because ultimately, that is my ambition, is to get on the 3 a.m. time slot of a local public access channel. I mean, that's the trailblazer who blazed the path before me, the one who inspires me. That's what they. Well, I mean, yeah, they could have easily been on 5 p.m., but the only times that I were watching, I mean, they might have been on 5 p.m. I don't really know. See, I only watched between 1 to 3 a.m. as far as TV goes back in the good old days. But so during that time slot, that's when they were on. And I mean, I'm sure they probably put them in that time slot because the bandwidth, the number of people that were tuning in would have overwhelmed the system between 5 and 6 p.m. So that's why they were usually on the overnight TV broadcast slot, you know, the 2 a.m., 3 a.m. But I mean, they had those other extraneous factors playing into why they're on the midnight overnight time slot. So, I mean, we just hope to be on the overnight time slot just because you imitate what you admire, and that's kind of the drive for the show that we got inspired by them when they filmed their show. And this was before, I mean, the internet was in its nascent stages back then, but this was before anybody even had the concept. This was before any YouTube show was around. This was before Joe Rogan talked to people, and now he just banters on about some sponsorship opportunities without disclosing who sponsors the show. So this was prior to that, and this was prior to any other. InfoWars was probably around back then. So yeah, I suppose InfoWars and the Central Minnesota Public Access channel were sort of the original pioneers of public access. Now, InfoWars later evolved into just a regular internet TV show, and the public access show from Central Minnesota just, I mean, they're still waiting for somebody to pick up the torch, which I think is what kind of happened. You know, they just sort of set the torch down, and now it's just there, and waiting for somebody to pick it up. I mean, that's what we're going to try to do. Now, we don't know how heavy the torch is, or if it's really hot, or where it even is. And we might need a giant crane to pick it up. Maybe a jib hoist, a cherry picker, something like that. So the fact of the matter is, ladies and gentlemen, that's kind of where we are as far as our broadcast ambitions. And we do have an agenda too. We want to make sure that you're healthy and happy and all that good fun stuff, because a healthy and happy audience, it is a healthy and happy society, and a healthy and happy society is a great society, which is one that we typically want to exist in. Now we've had tackled some topics before about exercise and being heart healthy and all that good fun stuff. So there's a something interesting I found online that said exercise outperforms antidepressants. Now it seems like a bit of a no-brainer, because anybody who's exercised any reasonable amount of time, you know, at least 3 days a week on a consistent routine basis, They know that they always usually feel good after they exercise. And they know that if they don't exercise after exercising for a while, they get the withdrawal syndrome. So it's almost as if you do sort of get addicted to it. But you know, you could consider it a good addiction because you get addicted to a lot of other things too. Cocaine, methamphetamines, heroin, fentanyl, opioids, prescription pharmaceutical drugs, SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, as an example, Zoloft, Paxil, and Proloft. So to be addicted to something like exercise is a far, it's not really lesser evil, it just seems to be better because your body knows what it wants. Like if you eat good food that's healthy for you and that makes you great again, your body will force you to eat that food all the time. Otherwise, it'll force you into a feeling of very, very atrocious thoughts and horrendous occurrences that go on with your body that just puts you in a really bad mood and a foul temper. So then you can trace it back to what you ate and what you consumed or your activities prior and leading up to that point to make a very careful analysis of things that you should and should not do again. And that's why we're very careful when we make changes to this show, because we want to make sure if we do make a change, it's a positive change. So if you make 3 changes, 2 of them are good, 1 of them was bad, you're going to think that it's a net gain, so you're going to continue with all 3 of them. When in reality, if you do 1 change at a time, you know if it's good or bad, and then you can continue on. So in the long term, you're better off. Short term, yeah, you do. The patient approach in the short term doesn't always work, but in the long term, it always builds up to something good and grand. It's like if you build a house on a crappy foundation. Say you're hurried and you rush to, because you want to put up a house quick. So you just find some junk foundation and then start laying down some block and cement and those Fox blocks and call the cement truck and they back up and they wheel out their little slide and then roll the cement on there. Then you start putting those rods in and then you start attaching the boards and building out the frame and then putting the siding on, then the windows and the doors, and then you put all the drywall inside, you mud and tape it and sand it and mud and tape it again and sand it. And then you start putting in the floor covers and the ceiling, the shingles, and then you're done with the house. And then you realize the foundation is sandy and now the house is all out of level, and then all of a sudden things start to break and crack. That's usually what happens when you're impatient. Now, yeah, you got a house quickly built that's somewhat functional, but if you didn't take the time to evaluate each step and to know for sure through a bit of trial and error and some finesse that this is the right step to take, then you sort of put yourself in a bit of a bind later on down the road. Oh, yeah, you could easily just demolish the house, get a better foundation, and then continue over again. So that's also the argument against complete dormancy and not just doing anything in general. So, I mean, it's better to be really hurried and rushed than to do nothing. But to be patient and very methodical, that's usually the approach that we try to take here, ladies and gentlemen. So that being said, they did a comparative analysis. Exercise is just as effective short term and more effective at preventing the return of depression. I mean, people might say, for example, you're taking the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, Zoloft, Paxil, Proloft. So if you continue to take them, eventually the depression does come back to a fair amount of people. Not everybody, but a lot of them. If you continue to exercise over time, a lesser quantity of people have the depression return. That's essentially all it's saying. Now, so about one quarter of the SSRI users become more anxious. Then there's also the side effects of sexual dysfunction, migraines, nausea, dizziness, diarrhea, tremors, fatigue, malaise, agitation, and drowsiness. Probably a bunch of others too. That's just a quick list off the top of this sheet here. And you don't. The study didn't even have much exercise at all. It was 30 minutes, 3 days a week. I mean, pretty much just about anybody can do that. I mean, anybody has that amount of time. You figure, what do you got? 24 hours a day, so 168 hours a week, and 8 hours a day you'll sleep, and say 8-9 hours a day you'll satisfy show sponsors. So that definitely leaves you with a good 80 hours, 70 to 80 hours. Definitely plenty of time to exercise, and then you can even incorporate the exercise. I mean, you obviously can't incorporate exercise into sleep, but you can certainly incorporate exercise in other activities too. For example, if you bike or walk to work, or if you bike or walk to kids' school, or if you are involved in some extracurricular activities like martial arts or tennis, table tennis, badminton, ping pong, racquetball sports, basketball, football, baseball, soccer, bowling, anything like that is Good way to get exercise. Good way to be social too, which also eradicates a lot of these anxieties and depression. And then you don't have to take SSRIs. So that being said, ladies and gentlemen, we're gonna have to put a conclusion on this show. Very simple and more common sense message. Exercise is better than antidepressants. Now, could some people use both of them? Yeah, they could, but this was a selective study of comparing one to the other, and they found out that exercise was in fact superior. So if you feed your body what it wants, if you try to tell your body what to do, it typically doesn't work. I mean, try it at work someday. Try to tell your boss what to do. Usually doesn't work. And you got to consider everything that functions in your body is doing what it does 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's all it does. That's all it knows. So if you try to tell it what to do when it's working 168 hours at its task and its responsibility, number one, it's going to think you're a complete moron. It'll revolt against you. It'll rebel. And you'll know it, maybe not instantly, but over time, it'll become very prevalent. Because one thing your body doesn't always necessarily know is how to communicate rebellious intentions. Because it's so used to just doing its job and being submissive and trying to make you great again that when you work against it, it doesn't really quite understand that. All it understands is to work symbiotically with you. So when you do work against it, it gets that you're working against it, but it needs to formulate a plan for how it's going to inform you that you're working against it. So that's why the symptoms of your ill will and your bad doings, your wrong ideas don't really show up until later on. Sometimes, yeah, they'll show up instantly. I mean, maybe your arm will fall off or something, but by and large, these things, patience is the key. Patience is a virtue. So that being said, ladies and gentlemen, we thank you very much for watching, and we'll be back for part 2 momentarily. Thank you very much. Without you, we are nothing.